And here we go with the digestive system. So it's going to be in two parts, part A and part B. So let's begin with part A. Okay, so the overview of the digestive system, or the alimentary canal, but it's going to be composed of the mouth, a little bit of the pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, rectum, and anus. You also do have some accessory organs, in the mouth, obviously the teeth, the tongue, but the liver is going to make bile, and the bile gets stored in the gallbladder. And you also have in your mouth salivary glands that make saliva, and the pancreas is an organ that will contribute much of the digestive enzymes. Okay, so here's a pretty picture. So let's talk about the way that food would move through the digestive system. So it would enter the mouth. Here you have salivary glands that would make the saliva. You would swallow it, and it would go down the esophagus via peristalsis, wave-like motion, and then it would enter the stomach. And now what you can see above this stomach is the liver, which is the largest solid organ of the body, and the gallbladder, this greenish tiny organ that stores the bile that's going to be needed to help digest fat. What is hard to see in the back is the pancreas. So here we go right here, the pancreas, and it lies in the back of the stomach, but there's going to be a duct, a common duct that will connect both the gallbladder and the pancreatic digestive juices that will enter into the small intestine, which is right here. So and it's hard to see because it goes behind. So here you have the small intestine, which is made up of the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. And that's where you have most digestion and absorption taking place. Now, what remains after that is going to be pushed into the large intestine with its ascending, transverse, descending, and sigmoid colon that will then push the feces at this stage of the game into the rectum and then the anus. So I like this term is a disassembly line, because the way that, well, let's say the food that we eat is much too large to be absorbed into the cells of our body, so it has to be disassembled. So what you have, just as an overview, is you have large carbohydrates like starches. They're going to be needed to be broken down into single sugars like glucose, and then you can absorb the glucose and the cells can use the glucose. If you have proteins, they are going to be digested in two parts. The first into polypeptide chains and then into amino acids, which then can be absorbed and used by cells. Fats have to be broken down into fatty acids and glycerol, and that's how they get used by cells. And nucleic acids have to be broken down into nucleotides in order for cells to make and repair DNA and RNA. So the 6 essential activities of the digestive disassembly line is ingestion, propulsion, mechanical digestion, chemical digestion, absorption, and defecation. So this is a pretty picture of what has just been what has just been appearing on the previous PowerPoint slide. So let's go right here. Ingestion is taking the food into the mouth, chewing it, and then swallowing it. You can talk about mechanical digestion as you use your teeth to break down the food. And then the propulsion is going to be this peristaltic wave-like motion. That's what the green line is trying to show you. Going down the esophagus. Now then you have the stomach making hydrochloric acid, which is your chemical digestion, as well as digestive enzymes like pepsin. And then the food is going to then go into the small intestine. Now, the small intestine is where you further break down food and then absorb it, meaning the monomers, the glucose, the fatty acids, the glycerol, the amino acids, the nucleic acids, into either the blood or the lymph, so that then you can transport it to every cell in the body. And then what is not going to be able to be broken down and absorbed will get pushed into the large intestine, and that will eventually form the feces that will enter the rectum and out the body via the anus. So that is kind of a figure explanation of that slide. All right, so here we go. Ingestion, taking food in. Propulsion really is peristalsis. Mechanical digestion, chewing, the churning of the food in the stomach. And the chemical digestion, that's usually the role of the digestive enzymes. Catabolism means breakdown. And absorption is the movement of these monomers from the GI tract to the blood or lymph. And then we all know what defecation does. Okay, now, here we go. Nervous control of the GI tract. What I love about the GI tract, and this is something that has been inherited through evolution, is we actually have a gut brain. And that is something that came before the actual central nervous system brain in evolution. And it's been so important that it has carried on, even though we have, as you know, a 3-pound, fairly gigantic brain. But digestion, you have to provide every cell in the body with fuel. You, for most of the time on the planet, have been a hunter-gatherer before civilization, before agriculture, so that you probably woke up in the morning as a hunter-gatherer and walked 20 miles a day. And that would mean that you would have to consume a lot of calories, and in order to survive, you would have to get the most bang for your caloric buck. And to have a gut brain, in addition to a central nervous system brain, is still that necessary. This is something that will never be on the exam, but humans have been on the planet for 100,000 years. 90,000 of those 100,000 years we've been hunter-gatherers. So having a gut brain, now what does a gut brain do? It's not like our central nervous system brain. It's like a network. It's like a woven cloth. It has threads that go horizontal and vertical, and they sort of lie in and on the digestive organs, specifically the stomach and the small intestine. I'll talk a little bit more about them in a bit, but the thing that's really important is that your central nervous system brain, your brain and spinal cord, can figure out, that you have eaten. It does not do a good job at figuring how much you have eaten and what exactly you ate. And it's a big difference between a T-bone steak and 2 sticks of celery. And what the gut brain's job is to analyze how much you've eaten and what the content is. What percent of fat, what percent of carbohydrate, what percent of protein. And the job of the gut brain is to utilize it in such a way that you get the most caloric bang for your buck, the most absorption of the food, so that relative to what comes in, you will better strip it of its energy, and so the feces that come out is pretty energy poor. Your central nervous system brain has never evolved to be that efficient. And so when you think about the fact that we eat about 2,000 calories a day, that's because of our gut brain. Otherwise, we'd have to eat 6,000 to 8,000 calories, and that sounds fantastic. But on the other hand, if you're a hunter-gatherer, that is not good news. So, having said that, yay for the gut brain. So, let me talk a little bit about the gut brain before I do the central nervous system brain, because it really does run the show more than the central nervous system brain. So, these are nerve nets, or called nerve plexes, in the GI tract. They're called short reflexes because they are actually very specialized cells in the stomach and the small intestine that can make hormones and digestive enzymes. And the gut brain is right there. You know, it's right there in the stomach, it's right there in the small intestine. So it's a short jaunt away, it's a short reflex. It's mediated by local enteric plexus or local stomach and small intestine nerve nets, aka the gut brain. There are two of these nerve nets. One is called the submucosal nerve plexus or nerve net, and that's going to control gastric secretions. And what that means is that we'll go into this in a second. The second layer of the GI tract is called the submucosa. It's obviously below the mucosal layer. And the thing about the submucosal layer is that that is going to be where you can make your hydrochloric acid, you can make your digestive enzymes. And if you have a nerve net there, then that can control how much of the hydrochloric acid and digestive enzymes are actually made. And that is going to be in response to how much you have eaten and what you have eaten. Now, there's going to be a second nerve net in your gut brain called the myenteric nerve plexus. It's in that smooth muscle layer. And the smooth muscle layer is what controls the movement of the food, peristalsis. Is it moving quickly? Is it moving slowly? And the gut brain decides depending on what you've eaten. So if I ate 2 stalks of celery and I ate the equivalent as far as space of steak, the celery is going to move through very quickly because there's just not a whole lot of nourishment in celery. And believe it or not, your gut brain knows. Where if I ate some mouthfuls of steak, steak has fat and protein, and you would want to spend a lot more time breaking that down so that your smooth muscle layer gut brain, myenteric nerve plexus, is going to slow down peristalsis after you've eaten a steak, where if you eat a salad and all it is greens, peristalsis moves along pretty rapidly. Now, ultimately, the central nervous system brain is going to overlook everything. It's great for overlooking. It's not very good for specifics as far as your GI tract goes, but it is there for an overview. And so, since it's a long way away from your stomach and your small intestine, it's called a long reflex, and it is going to involve mainly your brain, and your autonomic nerves. And we're going to have, since sympathetic and parasympathetic are going to be what can overall control digestion, then your autonomic nervous system is going to be different. Your parasympathetic is going to enhance digestion, and your sympathetic is going to inhibit it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a sec. Now, before we talk about it, we have to talk a little bit about the liver and what the liver does and so forth and so on. It's called the venous hepatic portal circulation. So before I get into each one of these specifics, I'm going to give you an overview. The food that you eat is not sterile. It has microbes in it. Hopefully not food poisoning microbes, but certainly there are microbes. And you want to make awfully sure that these microscopic, very, very tiny organisms are not going to get into your bloodstream. If it gets into your bloodstream, then sepsis can kill you in no time flat. So since we don't eat sterile food, we have to have an organ that is going to examine the food that we have absorbed into the bloodstream very carefully to make sure that when that absorbed food in the bloodstream reaches the main circulation, there is nothing in there. No poisons, no toxins, no microbes. They all have to be removed before that point in time. And that's one of the many jobs of the liver. So when you eat and food is absorbed into the blood then leaves the small intestine and goes into the liver, where it is examined by the liver, and the cells, the hepatocytes, are going to strip any microbes, any toxins, any poisons. So then the food is examined, the blood glucose levels are at homeostasis, and then it rejoins the larger venous circulation and eventually the vena cava, which will then bring everybody back to the right side of the heart. And this is absolutely necessary, whether it was a hunter-gatherer or you. We just do not eat food that does not contain microbes in it, and it's the job of the liver and the hepatic portal circulation to make sure that everything is examined before it gets into general circulation. So the points are that your nutrient-rich venous blood from your digestive system is going to go to the liver via the mesenteric vein. The liver is going to metabolically process and perhaps store, where hormones and other specialized cells will adjust the blood glucose. It will also, again, get rid of microbes and poisons and toxins. Then that blood coming out of the liver is going to use the hepatic vein that will drain into the vena cava, return the blood to the right side of the heart. This blood from the right side of the heart will go to the lung for oxygenation, return to the left side of the heart, where it will be pumped into the aorta, and then this aortic blood, this systemic blood, will be rich in both oxygen and glucose and other monomers like amino acids and fatty acids, etc. And that is what is going to guarantee that the cells of the body get the oxygen, get the glucose, get the nutrients, minus the toxins, minus the poisons, and minus the microbes. All right, so here's a pretty picture of a cross-section of the alimentary canal or GI tract. I would say that this is probably in the stomach area, but here's where the food is coming in. That's the lumen. And then you're going to have the first layer, which is called the mucosal layer, and that is the layer that actually faces the food. You're going to have specialized cells that can make enzymes and can make hydrochloric acid and so forth and so on. So that is that first layer. The second layer is the mucosal layer. So the mucosal layer is here, and then you have the submucosal layer, and that's where you're going to have your blood supply, your nerve supply, etc. Now, peristalsis is controlled by the muscularis layer. So this is like one of the muscularis layers. You have a circular layer, you have a longitudinal layer of muscle, and that produces the peristaltic motion. And then you have an outer layer, a serosa layer, for protection. All right, so this is just showing you your mucosal layer is epithelial in nature. It can produce hormones, enzymes, hydrochloric acid, and it also is where you will absorb the monomers. Submucosa, you're going to have your blood, lymph, and nerves. Your muscularis externa is going to be your smooth muscle, both the muscle that wraps around in a circular fashion as well as longitudinal to give you peristalsis, and then the outer serosa protective layer. Okay, so here we go. Let's eat something. So food is going to enter the mouth. The teeth is mechanically going to break down the food. You're going to salivate. The saliva is going to also enter, and it releases the first digestive enzyme, salivary amylase, which is going to break down carbs into simple sugars like glucose. Then you're going to swallow what is called a bolus of food, and it moves by peristalsis through the esophagus until it reaches the stomach. And then the role of the stomach and the small intestine and the large intestine and things like the liver and pancreas will be covered in Part B. So I will leave you at this point and rejoin you then. Thanks. See you soon.